The orc woman had been sleeping in the burnt-out shell of the old watchtower for 3 nights when Zachariah Fletcher found her huddled over a cooking fire that gave off more smoke than heat. She looked up at him with eyes the color of amber, her green skin mottled with bruises, her right arm wrapped in bloodied cloth, and something in his chest twisted at the sight of her despite every warning his father had ever given him about her kind. "You cannot stay here," he said, though his voice came out gentler than he had intended. "The constable patrols this road twice a week. If he finds you, he will either kill you or drive you back across the border." She stared at him for a long moment, her tusks just visible beneath her upper lip as she pressed her mouth into a thin line. "I know," she said finally, her voice rough as though she had been screaming or perhaps crying, "but I have nowhere else to go." Zachariah stood there in the gathering dusk, the weight of his empty cart behind him, and the weight of his conscience bearing down on his shoulders. He had been to town to sell the last of the copper ore he had managed to extract from the exhausted mine on his property, and he had enough coin now to buy flour and salt, and perhaps some dried meat, if he was careful. His 2 sons were waiting for him at home, probably hungry, probably fighting with each other the way boys of 8 and 10 always seemed to do when left to their own devices. He should walk away. He should pretend he had never seen her. But he had seen the way she held that injured arm close to her body, and he had seen the desperate hunger in her eyes, and he found himself saying, "I need order for my sons. You need a roof. Come with me, and we will work something out." Her eyes widened, and for the first time since he had approached, he saw something other than wary defiance in her face. "You would take me into your home. A human would do that." "I would take you into my home to cook and clean and keep my boys from killing each other while I work the mine," he said, trying to make it sound like a purely practical arrangement. "In exchange, you would have shelter and food and safety from the constable. That is all I am offering." She stood slowly, wincing as she put weight on her left leg, and he noticed for the first time that she was limping. She was tall, taller than him by at least 3 inches, and despite the injuries and the obvious exhaustion, there was strength in the set of her shoulders and the way she held herself. She looked at him for a long moment, and he wondered what she saw when she looked at him. A trap, a fool. A desperate man willing to risk everything for a little help around the house. "What are your terms?" she asked finally. "You work for your keep. You do not frighten my sons. You do not steal from me or hurt anyone on this property. If anyone asks, you are a servant I hired from the border settlements, and you keep your head down and your mouth shut when strangers come around." He paused, then added, "And if you want to leave, you can leave. I will not keep you prisoner." Something flickered in her eyes at that last part, something that might have been relief or might have been disbelief. "What is your name?" "Zachariah Fletcher." "My sons are Owen and Simon, and you are Greta," she said simply. "I have no other name now. My clan cast me out 3 weeks ago, and I am no longer permitted to use the clan name." He wanted to ask why, wanted to know what had happened to leave her injured and alone and desperate enough to accept help from a human stranger, but the sun was setting fast, and he had a long walk ahead of him. "Can you walk? It is 2 miles to my home, and the road is rough." "I can walk," she said, though the way she gathered her few possessions suggested it would cost her. They walked in silence as the last light drained from the sky, and Zachariah found himself stealing glances at her when he thought she was not looking. She moved with a pronounced limp, favoring her right leg, and she kept that injured arm pressed close to her body. He wondered what had happened to her, wondered if she had been in a battle, or if her own people had done this to her when they cast her out. He had heard stories about orcs, about their brutal customs and their violent culture, but he had never actually met one before. The border was 20 miles from his property, and orcs rarely ventured this far into human territory except during raids. "Why did your clan cast you out?" he asked finally, unable to contain his curiosity. She was quiet for so long that he thought she would not answer. Then she said, "I refused to kill a human child during a raid. I hid her instead and helped her escape. When my brother found out what I had done, he told the war chief, and the war chief declared me a traitor to our people. They beat me and broke my arm and told me I was no longer welcome among the clan. If I return, they will kill me." Zachariah felt something cold settle in his stomach. "You saved a child." She was 5 years old. Her parents were already dead. What honor is there in killing a child? Greta's voice was fierce despite her exhaustion. "I told them this, but they said I was weak, that I had human sympathy, that I was not fit to be called an orc." "That child was lucky you found her," he said quietly. "Perhaps, or perhaps I have only delayed her suffering. The world is not kind to orphans, human or orc." They reached his property as the stars were beginning to emerge, and Zachariah felt a familiar mixture of pride and despair as he looked at the small stone house with its sagging roof and the dark mouth of the mine shaft visible on the hillside beyond. This land had belonged to his family for 3 generations, and the mine had been profitable once, before the best veins of copper had been exhausted. Now he spent most of his days chipping away at rock for tiny amounts of ore, barely enough to keep his family fed and clothed. His wife had died 2 years ago from fever, and since then he had been struggling to manage the work of the mine and the work of raising 2 young boys on his own. "It is not much," he said as they approached the house, "but it is warm and dry and there is food." Before he could reach the door, it burst open and 2 boys came tumbling out, shouting over each other about how hungry they were and how long he had been gone, and how Owen had broken Simon's favorite toy soldier. They stopped mid-argument when they saw Greta, their eyes going wide, their mouths falling open. "Boys," Zachariah said firmly, putting himself between them and Greta without quite meaning to. "This is Greta. She's going to be helping around the house for a while. I expect you to treat her with respect and not cause trouble. Understood?" Owen, the older one, stared at Greta with a mixture of fear and fascination. "She is an orc." "I am aware," Zachariah said dryly. "And you are a boy who has not had a proper meal in 3 days because your father has been too busy working to cook. Greta is going to help with that. Now go inside and set the table." Simon, the younger boy, was still staring at Greta with wide eyes. "Are you going to eat us?" "Simon," Zachariah said sharply, but Greta spoke before he could continue. "I do not eat children," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "I eat the same food you eat, bread and meat and vegetables. And right now I am very hungry, so if you help me find the kitchen, perhaps we can all have dinner together." Simon looked at his father, who nodded, and then he slowly approached Greta. "Your skin is green." "It is," she agreed. "And you have tusks, small ones, yes. Can I touch them?" "Simon," Zachariah said again, but Greta surprised him by kneeling down, wincing as she did so, and letting the boy reach out tentatively to touch one of the small tusks that protruded from her lower jaw. "They are smooth," Simon said wonderingly. "I thought they would be rough like bone." "They are bone," Greta said, "but bone can be smooth if it is taken care of. Now shall we find that kitchen?" Owen had already disappeared inside, but Simon took Greta's hand and led her toward the door, chattering about how his father could not cook anything except porridge, and sometimes he burned even that. Zachariah followed them inside, feeling as though he had just set something in motion that he did not fully understand and could not take back. The kitchen was a mess, as he had known it would be. Dirty dishes were piled in the basin, there were crumbs on the table, and the fire in the hearth had burned down to embers. Greta looked around with an expression he could not quite read. Then she set down her small bundle of possessions and said, "I will need water and clean rags for my arm first. Then I will make dinner." "Your arm should be seen by a healer," Zachariah said. "I cannot see a healer. If a healer sees me, they will report me to the constable. I will tend to it myself if you can give me what I need." He wanted to argue, but he could see the stubborn set of her jaw, and he knew she was right about the healer. Instead, he fetched water from the well and found the cleanest rags he could, and he watched as she carefully unwrapped the bloodied cloth from her arm. The wound underneath made him suck in a breath. Her forearm was clearly broken, the bone visible through torn skin, and the flesh around it was swollen and discolored. "This needs to be set properly," he said. "It will not heal right if it is not set." "I set it as well as I could 3 weeks ago," she said. "It is too late to do more now." "Let me try," he heard himself say. "I have set broken bones before. My wife, she used to help with the animals when we had animals, and she taught me how to splint a broken leg or wing. It is not so different with people." Greta looked at him for a long moment, then she nodded. "All right, but do it quickly." He sent the boys outside with instructions to gather firewood, then he examined her arm as carefully as he could. The break was bad, but he thought he could feel where the bones should meet. He had her lie down on the table, and he braced her elbow, and then he pulled hard and fast while she bit down on a leather strap to keep from screaming. He felt the bones grind together and then click into place, and she made a sound that was halfway between a gasp and a sob. "It is done," he said, breathing hard from the effort. "I am going to splint it now. Stay still." He worked quickly, using 2 straight pieces of wood and strips of cloth to bind her arm firmly in place. By the time he finished, Greta's face was pale green and slick with sweat, but she sat up slowly and examined his work with critical eyes. "You did well," she said finally. "Thank you." "You should rest," he said. "I should cook," she corrected. "That was the bargain. You give me shelter and I work for my keep." She stood and moved to the hearth, and despite her injured arm and her limp, she began to move around the kitchen with surprising efficiency. She built up the fire, set a pot of water to boil, and began sorting through his meager supplies with the air of someone who had cooked under difficult circumstances before. Zachariah watched her for a moment, then he went outside to check on his sons. Owen and Simon were sitting on the woodpile talking in low voices. They stopped when they saw him approach. "Is she going to stay?" Owen asked. "For a while, yes. But she is an orc. Everyone says orcs are dangerous." "Everyone says a lot of things that are not true," Zachariah said carefully. "Greta saved a human child's life and her own people punished her for it. She needs help and we need help. That is all there is to it." "Are you going to marry her?" Simon asked suddenly. "What? No. Where did you get that idea?" "Old Marcus said that when a woman comes to live with a man, they get married." "Is that true?" "Not always. Greta is here to work, not to marry me. Now bring that wood inside before your dinner gets cold." The boys gathered their armloads of firewood and trudged back toward the house, and Zachariah followed them slowly, wondering if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Bringing an orc woman into his home, into his children's lives, would be seen as madness by anyone who knew about it. But when he stepped inside and smelled the rich scent of soup cooking and saw Greta ladling portions into bowls with her good hand while the boys set the table without being asked, he felt something ease in his chest that had been tight for 2 years. They ate together that first night in awkward silence, the boys stealing glances at Greta and Greta keeping her eyes on her bowl. The soup was simple but good, better than anything Zachariah had managed to make in months, and he found himself eating 2 bowls and then a third. When the meal was finished, Greta began to clear the dishes, but Zachariah stopped her. "You need rest," he said firmly. "I will show you where you can sleep." He led her to the small room off the kitchen that had once been a pantry, but had been converted into sleeping quarters for a hired hand years ago. There was a narrow bed with a thin mattress and a single blanket, and a small window that looked out onto the hillside. It was not much, but it was private and it was clean. "This will do," Greta said quietly. "Thank you. If you need anything in the night, my room is upstairs and the boys sleep in the loft. There is a bolt on the door if you want privacy." She nodded, and he left her there, closing the door behind him. He got his sons ready for bed, listening to their excited chatter about the orc woman who was now living in their house, and he tried to answer their questions as honestly as he could. When they finally fell asleep, he lay in his own bed and stared at the ceiling and wondered what he had brought into his home. He woke before dawn, as he always did, and he dressed quietly and went downstairs to find Greta already awake and working in the kitchen. She had cleaned the dishes from the night before and swept the floor, and now she was kneading bread dough with her one good hand, the injured arm resting carefully against her body. "You should not be working yet," he said. "I cannot sleep," she replied. "And my hands need something to do, or I will go mad thinking about everything I have lost." He understood that feeling better than he wanted to admit. He poured himself a cup of water from the pitcher and sat at the table, watching her work. In the gray light of dawn, she looked less frightening than she had the night before. Her green skin had a warm undertone to it, almost olive, and her features were strong but not harsh. Her ears came to delicate points, and her dark hair was pulled back in a practical braid that hung to the middle of her back. "How old are you?" he asked. 23 summers. "And you?" 31. "My wife was 28 when she died." "I am sorry for your loss." "Thank you." He paused, then asked, "Were you married, before your clan cast you out?" "No. I was betrothed once, but he was killed in a raid 2 years ago. After that, I focused on becoming a warrior. I thought that was my path." She shaped the dough into a loaf and set it aside to rise. "I was wrong. Being cast out does not mean you were wrong to save that child. It means I am no longer a warrior. I am no longer an orc in the eyes of my people. I do not know what I am now. You are someone who chose mercy over violence. That is worth something." She looked at him with those amber eyes, and he saw the gratitude there even though she did not speak it aloud. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then he stood and told her he was going to the mine and would return by midday. She nodded and turned back to her work, and he left her there with the bread rising and the morning light beginning to creep through the windows. The first week passed in a blur of adjustment. Greta worked tirelessly despite her injuries, cooking and cleaning and keeping the house in order with a determination that bordered on obsessive. The boys gradually grew less afraid of her and more curious, asking her endless questions about orc culture and whether she had ever killed anyone and what it was like to have tusks. She answered them with patience, and Zachariah often came home from the mine to find her sitting at the table with both boys, telling them stories about the orc clans and their traditions while she mended their clothes with her good hand. At night, after the boys were in bed, she and Zachariah would sit by the fire and talk. He learned that she had been training to be a warrior since she was 12, that she had 3 brothers and a sister, that she loved swimming in the cold mountain streams near her clan's territory. She learned that he had inherited the mine from his father, that his wife had been a baker's daughter from the nearest town, that he had always wanted to travel but had never left the valley where he was born. "Do you regret staying?" she asked one night. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But this is my home. This is where my sons will grow up. I cannot abandon it just because the work is hard and the mine is nearly exhausted. What will you do when there is no more copper to extract? I do not know. Find another way to survive, I suppose. Sell the land, perhaps, though I hate the thought of it. She was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. Then she said, in my clan, when a mine or a hunting ground became exhausted, we would move to new territory, but we were nomadic. You are tied to this place. I am, he agreed. For better or worse. The second week, Greta's arm began to heal properly, and her limp improved as the bruising on her leg faded. She started taking on more tasks, working in the small garden behind the house, and even helping Zachariah sort the ore he brought up from the mine. The boys became completely comfortable with her, treating her more like an aunt than a stranger, and Zachariah found himself relying on her presence in ways that both comforted and unsettled him. It was during the third week that the constable came. Zachariah was in the mine when he heard Owen shouting his name, his voice high and panicked. He dropped his pickaxe and ran toward the entrance, his heart pounding, and he emerged to find his son standing in the path that led down from the house. The constable is here, Owen gasped. He is talking to Greta. Father, he has seen her. Zachariah ran. He had never run so fast in his life, his boots pounding on the hard, packed earth, his breath tearing at his lungs. He reached the house to find the constable standing in the yard with his hand on his sword, facing Greta, who stood in the doorway with her chin raised and her eyes defiant. This is an orc, the constable was saying. You are harboring an enemy of the kingdom. This is my employee, Zachariah said, trying to keep his voice steady as he stepped between them. She works for me in exchange for room and board. There is no law against that. There is a law against providing aid to orcs. They are monsters and raiders, and she should be driven back across the border or killed. The constable looked past Zachariah at Greta. What clan are you from, orc? I have no clan, Greta said quietly. I was cast out. Then you are a vagrant and a potential threat. I am within my rights to arrest you or worse. She is no threat, Zachariah said, hearing the desperation creeping into his voice. She has been living here for 3 weeks and has done nothing but help my family. If you arrest her, you are arresting an innocent woman. She is not a woman, she is an orc. She is both, Zachariah said, and he was surprised by the conviction in his own voice. And she is under my protection. If you want to arrest her, you will have to arrest me as well for harboring her. The constable stared at him for a long moment, his hand still on his sword. Then he said, You are making a mistake, Fletcher. When she turns on you, do not come crying to me for help. I will not, Zachariah said. The constable left, but Zachariah knew it was not over. Word would spread that he was harboring an orc woman, and there would be consequences. That night he sat with Greta by the fire and tried to figure out what to do. I should leave, she said. I am putting you and your sons in danger. Where would you go? I do not know. Further into human territory, perhaps, or north to the borderlands where law is less strict. You would not survive the journey in winter, and even if you did, you would be alone and unprotected. He hesitated, then said, Stay, at least until spring. By then your arm will be fully healed, and you will have a better chance. Why are you doing this? She asked, her voice raw. Why are you risking so much for someone like me? Because you saved a child when it would have been easier to kill her. Because you work harder than anyone I have ever known. Because my sons are happier with you here than they have been since their mother died. He paused, then added quietly, Because I am happier with you here. She stared at him, her amber eyes wide and searching, and he realized what he had just admitted out loud. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things, and then she reached out with her good hand and touched his gently. I will stay, she said. Until spring, and then we will see. Winter came early that year, bringing snow and ice and bitter winds that howled through the valley. The mine became too dangerous to work, except on the clearest days, and Zachariah found himself spending more time in the house, helping Greta with the endless tasks of keeping a household running in the cold months. They worked side by side, and he became aware of her in ways that made his chest ache. The way she hummed while she cooked, the way she laughed at Simon's terrible jokes, the way she looked at him sometimes when she thought he was not paying attention. The boys were delighted to have both adults in the house, and they took full advantage of it by begging for stories and games and help with the sleds Zachariah built for them. Greta proved to be surprisingly good at sledding, her strength and balance giving her an advantage on the steep hill behind the house, and she spent entire afternoons racing the boys and falling into snowdrifts and coming inside with her cheeks flushed and her eyes bright. "I have never seen you so happy," Zachariah said one evening after the boys had gone to bed. "I have never had reason to be so happy," she replied. "With my clan, there was always fighting and training and preparing for the next raid. There was no time for play, no time for laughter. I did not know life could be like this." "Like what?" "Gentle," she said simply. "Your world is gentler than mine was. My world has its own cruelties," he reminded her. "The constable would have killed you if he thought he could get away with it, but you would not have let him. That is the difference." He wanted to ask her what she meant by that, wanted to know if she felt the same pull between them that he did, but he was afraid of the answer. Instead, he said good night and went upstairs to his empty bed, where he lay awake thinking about green skin and amber eyes and the sound of her laughter. The turning point came on a night in the dead of winter when the snow was piled so high that the windows were half buried, and the cold was so intense that they could see their breath inside the house, despite the roaring fire. Zachariah woke to the sound of crying, and he stumbled downstairs to find Simon sitting at the kitchen table with Greta beside him, her arm around his shoulders. "What happened?" Zachariah asked, his heart clenching. "Bad dream," Greta said quietly. "He dreamed about his mother." Simon turned to Zachariah with tears streaming down his face. "I cannot remember what she looked like, Father. I try and I try, but I cannot see her face any more." Zachariah sat down and pulled his son into his arms, holding him while he sobbed. Greta stayed beside them, her hand resting on Simon's back, and when the boy finally cried himself out and stumbled back to bed, she and Zachariah were left alone in the firelight. "You are good with them," he said. "They are easy to love," she replied. "Their mother would have liked you." "Would she? Or would she have been frightened of me like everyone else? She would have seen what I see, someone kind and brave and stronger than she knows." Greta looked at him, and there was something vulnerable in her expression that he had never seen before. "Zachariah, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I am falling in love with you," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "I know I should not. I know it is impossible. You are human and I am orc and the world will never accept us, but I cannot help it. Every day I wake up and think that I should leave, that I am making everything harder for you, but I cannot bring myself to go because the thought of not seeing you again makes me feel like I am breaking inside." He stared at her, his heart pounding so hard he thought she must be able to hear it. Then he reached out and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "I am falling in love with you too," he said. "I have been for weeks. Maybe since that first night when you knelt down and let Simon touch your tusks, or maybe even before that when you looked at me with those eyes and I saw everything you had lost. I do not care that you are orc. I care that you make my sons laugh, and you make my house a home, and you make me feel alive again after 2 years of just surviving." She made a sound that was half laugh and half sob, and then she was leaning toward him, and he was leaning toward her, and their lips met in a kiss that was gentle and desperate and full of everything they had not been able to say. Her tusks pressed against his lips, strange and wonderful, and her hand came up to cup his face with surprising tenderness. They broke apart, breathing hard, and Zachariah rested his forehead against hers. "What do we do now?" she whispered. "I do not know," he admitted. "But we will figure it out together." They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the firelight while the snow fell outside and the world slept. When they finally went to their separate beds, Zachariah lay awake with his heart full and his mind racing with possibilities and fears. The next morning, Owen asked why his father and Greta kept looking at each other and smiling, and Simon said it was because they were in love like in the stories, and Zachariah did not deny it. The boys seemed delighted by this development, and they spent the day plotting ways to get their father and Greta to kiss again, which mostly involved hanging mistletoe in doorways and then shoving the adults under it. "You are terrible conspirators," Greta told them, laughing. "I can see everything you are doing." "But is it working?" Simon asked hopefully. "Maybe," she said, and she caught Zachariah's eye across the room and smiled in a way that made his breath catch. As winter deepened, so did their relationship. They were careful in front of the boys, not wanting to move too fast or confuse them, but at night when the children were asleep, they would sit together by the fire and talk about the future. Greta told him about her dreams of a life without violence, of raising children in peace, of belonging somewhere. Zachariah told her about his fears for his sons, his worries about the mine, his hope that somehow they could build something lasting together. "We should marry," he said one night, the words coming out before he could stop them. She looked at him with wide eyes. "Are you asking me?" "I am. I know it is complicated and dangerous and the whole world will think we are mad, but I do not care. I want you to be my wife. I want to wake up beside you every morning and build a life with you and give my sons the mother they have been missing." He took her hands in his. "Marry me, Greta, please." She was crying, tears streaming down her green cheeks, and she nodded frantically. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." They kissed, and this time it was not gentle. It was fierce and claiming and full of promise, and when they finally broke apart they were both breathing hard and grinning like fools. "The boys will be thrilled," Zachariah said. "The constable will be furious," Greta said. "Let him be. I am done caring what other people think." They told Owen and Simon the next morning, and the boys reacted exactly as predicted. Owen whooped and threw his arms around Greta, and Simon started dancing around the kitchen chanting about how he was going to have a new mother. They spent the rest of the day planning the wedding, with the boys insisting that there should be a feast and dancing and that they should be allowed to stay up late. "Where will we have the ceremony?" Greta asked. "No priest will marry us." "Then we will marry ourselves," Zachariah said. "We will speak our vows to each other in front of witnesses, and that will be enough. The law may not recognize it, but we will know the truth." They decided to have the ceremony in the spring, when the snow had melted and the world was green again. It would give them time to prepare and to think about what came after. But first, they had to survive the rest of the winter. The constable came back in early February, this time with 2 men from the town. They stood in the yard and demanded that Greta be turned over to them, claiming that there had been reports of an orc raiding party near the border and that she was likely a spy. "She has not left my property in 4 months, Zachariah said, his voice hard. "She is not a spy. She is my betrothed, and you will leave her alone." "Your betrothed?" One of the townsmen spat on the ground. "You are going to marry that creature. Have you lost your mind?" "I have found it, actually. Now get off my land before I make you leave." The constable stepped forward, his hand on his sword. "You are making powerful enemies, Fletcher. We could burn this place to the ground and no one would stop us." "You could try," Zachariah said, and he was aware of Greta standing in the doorway behind him, her presence giving him courage. "But I think you will find I am not so easy to intimidate. Now leave." They left, but the threat hung in the air like smoke. That night, Zachariah made sure all the doors were barred and all the windows shuttered, and he slept with his father's old sword within reach. Greta did not sleep at all. She sat by the window in her small room, watching the yard, ready to fight if it came to that. But no one came. The days passed, and slowly the immediate threat seemed to fade. Still, Zachariah knew it was only a matter of time before something happened. He began making plans, thinking about how he could protect his family if things turned violent. He taught Greta how to use the crossbow he kept for hunting, and he was impressed by how quickly she learned. Her warrior training had not left her, even if her people had. Spring came slowly, melting the snow inch by inch, revealing the brown grass and the muddy earth beneath. The mine became workable again, and Zachariah spent his days extracting what little copper he could find while Greta worked on preparing the house and the garden for the growing season. The boys helped where they could, and the household fell into a comfortable rhythm. They set the wedding date for the 1st of April, when the trees would be budding, and the air would be warm enough to celebrate outside. Greta made herself a simple dress from cloth Zachariah had bought in town, and he cleaned his best shirt and trousers until they were as presentable as he could make them. The boys practiced the short speeches they had written, in which they promised to be good sons to Greta and to accept her as their new mother. The night before the wedding, Zachariah could not sleep. He lay in bed thinking about everything that had happened since that evening when he had found Greta in the ruins of the old watchtower. She had come into his life broken and desperate, and she had brought with her a kind of light that he had not known he was missing. She had made his house a home again, had given his sons a mother, had given him a reason to believe in the future. He got up and went downstairs, intending to get a drink of water, and he found Greta sitting at the kitchen table with a candle burning in front of her. "Could not sleep?" he asked. "Too many thoughts," she said. "I keep thinking about my family, about the clan I left behind. I wonder if they ever think about me, if they ever regret what they did." "Do you regret it, saving that child?" "Never. But I regret losing my family. I regret that I cannot share this happiness with them, that they will never know the man I am going to marry or the boys I am going to raise as my own." She looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "Is it wrong to be sad on the night before my wedding?" "No," he said gently, sitting down beside her. "It is not wrong at all. You have lost a great deal. It makes sense that you would grieve for it. But I am gaining so much too. I am gaining you and Owen and Simon and a life I never thought I could have. I should be happy. You can be both, happy and sad at the same time. That is what it means to be alive." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and he put his arm around her, holding her close. They sat like that until the candle burned down to nothing, and then they went to their separate rooms to try to get what sleep they could before the morning. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, with a warm breeze that carried the scent of new growth. They held the ceremony in the yard, with Owen and Simon standing as witnesses. Zachariah had invited no one else, knowing that most of the people in town would not come and those who did would only cause trouble. It did not matter. The people he loved were there, and that was enough. He had written his own vows, and he spoke them with his heart in his throat while Greta stood before him in her simple dress, her green skin glowing in the sunlight, her amber eyes shining with tears. "Greta, I take you as my wife, my partner, my companion in all things." I promise to stand beside you against whatever the world throws at us. I promise to honor you, to cherish you, to build a life with you that is full of joy and laughter and love. I promise to be a good husband to you and a good father to any children we may have together, and to raise Owen and Simon to treat you with the respect and love you deserve. This I swear before my sons and before whatever gods may be listening." Greta's voice was steady when she spoke her vows, though he could see her hands shaking. "Zachariah, I take you as my husband, my protector, my heart. I promise to be a good wife to you and a good mother to your sons. I promise to work beside you, to support you, to build a home with you that is safe and warm and full of love. I promise to be faithful to you in all things, to stand with you against any threat, to love you with everything I am. This I swear before Owen and Simon and before the spirits of my ancestors, who I hope are watching even though they cast me out." Zachariah took her hands, and they kissed while the boys cheered and threw handfuls of early wildflowers that they had gathered that morning. It was not a grand ceremony, but it was theirs, and it was real. And when it was over, Zachariah felt as though something fundamental had shifted in the world. They spent the afternoon celebrating, eating the special meal that Greta had prepared and listening to the boys tell elaborate stories about how they had always known their father and Greta would fall in love. As the sun began to set, Owen and Simon were sent off to the neighbor's farm to spend the night, an arrangement Zachariah had made weeks ago. And for the first time since Greta had come to live with them, he and she were truly alone. They stood in the kitchen, looking at each other, and Zachariah felt suddenly nervous. He had been married before, had shared a bed with his first wife for 10 years, but this felt different. This felt new and precious and terrifyingly important. "We do not have to," Greta said quietly. "If you are not ready, we can wait." "I am ready," he said, and he was surprised to find it was true. "I want this. I want you." She smiled, and she took his hand and led him upstairs to the room that had been his alone for 2 years. They undressed each other slowly, learning the landscape of each other's bodies in the fading light. Her skin was green all over, smooth and warm under his hands, and she had scars he had never seen before, marks from battles and training and the life she had lived before she came to him. He traced them with his fingers and his lips, and she gasped and pulled him closer. When they finally came together, it was with a gentleness that surprised them both. He had expected something fierce and desperate, but instead it was slow and tender and full of wonder. She said his name like a prayer, and he held her as though she was something infinitely precious, and when it was over they lay tangled together in the darkness, breathing in sync. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "I love you too," she whispered back. "More than I thought I could love anyone." They fell asleep like that, and Zachariah woke in the middle of the night to find her still in his arms, her green skin luminous in the moonlight that streamed through the window. He watched her sleep and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Zachariah's life. He worked in the mine during the day, and Greta worked in the house and the garden, and in the evenings they would sit together with the boys and talk about their day. Owen and Simon took to calling Greta Mother without prompting, and she glowed every time they did it. The household felt complete in a way it had not since before his first wife died, but the outside world was not so kind. Word had spread about the wedding, and people in town began to treat Zachariah differently. The merchant who had always bought his copper started offering lower prices, and when Zachariah confronted him, the man said that he could not be seen supporting someone who married an orc. The baker refused to sell him bread, and the blacksmith turned him away when he needed a new pickaxe. Slowly, they were being frozen out of the community. "We could leave," Greta suggested one night. Go somewhere else, start over where no one knows us. And go where? This is happening everywhere. Humans fear orcs, and they will not accept us no matter where we go. He squeezed her hand. I will not let them drive us from our home. We will find a way to survive. But surviving became harder as the weeks turned into months. The price for his copper dropped so low that it was barely worth extracting, and their supplies began to dwindle. Zachariah considered swallowing his pride and going to the next town over to sell his ore, but it was a 3-day journey and he did not want to leave Greta and the boys unprotected for that long. The solution came from an unexpected source. One morning, a wagon pulled up to the house and a woman climbed down. She was tall and stern-looking, with iron-gray hair and sharp blue eyes, and she introduced herself as Margaret from the neighboring valley. I heard about what you did, she said without preamble. Marrying an orc woman. People are talking about it, saying you are crazy or cursed or both. Zachariah felt his jaw tighten. If you came here to insult my wife, you can leave now. I came here to offer you work, Margaret said. I run a lumber operation in the next valley, and I need someone who knows how to work hard and keep their mouth shut. I do not care if your wife is an orc or a dragon or the queen of the fairies. All I care about is whether you can do the job. Zachariah stared at her, hardly daring to hope. What kind of work? Managing my crews, handling the accounts, making sure the trees get cut and hauled without anyone getting killed. It pays well, and I do not give a damn what the town thinks about anything. She looked past him to where Greta had appeared in the doorway. Your wife can work too if she wants. I always need good hands. They talked for an hour, working out the details, and by the time Margaret left, Zachariah felt as though a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He would still keep the mine, working it on his days off, but the lumber job would provide steady income and a way to support his family without relying on the people who had turned their backs on them. Why did she do that? Greta asked after the wagon had disappeared down the road. Why would she help us when everyone else has abandoned us? I do not know, Zachariah said, but I am grateful for it. He started working for Margaret the following week, and it was hard work, harder than the mine in many ways, but it was satisfying and it paid well. Greta came with him sometimes, helping to organize the lumber and keep the accounts, and the men on the crews quickly learned to respect her strength and her sharp mind. There were some who grumbled about working alongside an orc, but Margaret shut that down quickly, and eventually even the most skeptical workers came to accept Greta's presence. Summer arrived, bringing long days and warm nights and the kind of peace that Zachariah had thought was lost to him forever. The garden flourished under Greta's care, and they had more food than they had seen in years. Owen and Simon were growing like weeds, and they were happy and healthy and full of life. At night, Zachariah would lie in bed with Greta in his arms and think that maybe, just maybe, they had found a way to make this impossible thing work. In late July, Greta told him she was pregnant. They were in the garden, picking beans for dinner when she said it. Zachariah dropped the basket he was holding, beans scattering across the ground, and he stared at her with his mouth open. "Are you certain?" he managed to say. "I am certain. I have missed my cycle twice now, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings. I know the signs." She looked at him with a mixture of hope and fear. "Are you happy about it?" He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around while she laughed. "Happy? I am ecstatic. We are going to have a baby, Greta, our baby. It will be half human and half orc," she said quietly when he set her down. "I do not know what that will mean. I do not know if the child will be accepted by either of our peoples. The child will be ours, and that is all that matters. We will love them no matter what they look like or what the world thinks of them." He kissed her, long and deep. "We are going to be parents together. That is the most amazing thing I have ever heard." They told Owen and Simon that night, and the boys were thrilled at the idea of having a younger sibling. They immediately started debating names and arguing about whether it would be a brother or a sister, and planning all the things they would teach the baby when it was old enough. Zachariah watched them and felt his heart swell with so much love he thought it might burst. The pregnancy was not easy. Greta suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, and Zachariah often woke to find her retching into a basin, her face pale green and slick with sweat. He held her hair back and brought her water and did everything he could to make her comfortable, but there was little he could do except be there. Margaret gave Greta lighter duties at the lumber operation, and the men on the crews were surprisingly protective of her, making sure she did not lift anything too heavy and that she took breaks when she needed them. As her belly grew, so did the wonder of it. Zachariah loved to put his hand on her stomach and feel the baby move, loved to watch her face light up when the child kicked. Owen and Simon would fight for the chance to feel their future sibling move, and Greta would laugh and let them both press their hands against her belly while the baby squirmed inside her. Autumn came, and with it, a different kind of threat. There had been increased orc raids along the border, and the king had sent soldiers to patrol the area. One afternoon, a squad of soldiers stopped at the house while Zachariah was at work, and they found Greta alone with the boys. Owen told him what happened when he got home, his voice shaking with anger and fear. The soldiers had demanded to know what an orc was doing in a human household, and when Greta explained that she was married to the owner, they had laughed and said that such a marriage was not legal. They had threatened to arrest her, to drag her away, and it was only when she showed them her swollen belly that they had backed down, made uncomfortable by the idea of arresting a pregnant woman. "They said they would be back," Owen said. "They said that the baby would be an abomination, and that you were a traitor to your own kind." Zachariah felt rage rise in him like a tide, hot and fierce, and almost overwhelming. He wanted to hunt those soldiers down and make them pay for frightening his wife and his sons, but he knew that would only make things worse. Instead, he held Greta close and promised her that he would not let anyone take her away. "We need to be prepared," he said that night. "If they come back, if they try to arrest you, we need to have a plan." "What kind of plan?" Greta asked. "We could run. Take the boys and the baby when it comes and head for the borderlands. Live somewhere remote where the king's soldiers do not go. You would give up your home for me. I would give up everything for you. You and the boys and this baby, you are my home now. The land, the mine, the house, they are just places. You are what matters." She cried then, and he held her while she sobbed out all her fear and gratitude and love. When she finally calmed, she said, "I do not want to run. I do not want to spend my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for someone to find us. I want our child to grow up here in this house with their brothers and their parents. I want them to have roots. Then we will stay," he said. "And we will fight if we have to." They began making preparations, just in case. Zachariah bought extra supplies from Margaret's contacts in the next valley, people who did not care about his wife's heritage. He repaired the old crossbow and made sure they had plenty of bolts. He taught Greta how to bar the doors from the inside so that no one could break in easily. And he showed Owen where he kept his father's sword and how to use it if it came to that. The baby came in late October, on a cold, clear night when the stars were bright enough to read by. Greta's labor was long and difficult, and Zachariah stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and wiping her forehead and telling her how strong she was, how brave, how much he loved her. Owen and Simon waited downstairs, and Zachariah had sent for Margaret, who had experience with childbirth and arrived just in time to help. When the baby finally came, it was a girl, and she was perfect. She had her mother's green skin, a lighter shade than Greta's, almost mint-colored, and her father's brown eyes. She had tiny tusks, just beginning to emerge from her lower jaw, and delicate pointed ears. Her cry was loud and healthy, and when Margaret placed her in Greta's arms, Zachariah thought he had never seen anything more beautiful in his entire life. "What will we name her?" Greta asked, her voice hoarse from labor. "I was thinking Lily," Zachariah said, "if you like it." "Lily," Greta repeated, looking down at the tiny green face. "Lily Fletcher. It is perfect." Owen and Simon were allowed to come upstairs, and they stared at their new sister with awe. Simon reached out tentatively to touch her tiny hand, and Lily's fingers wrapped around his, and his face broke into the biggest smile Zachariah had ever seen. "She is so little," Simon breathed. "We have to protect her." "We will," Owen said seriously. "We are her big brothers. That is our job." The weeks after Lily's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder. She was a good baby, crying only when she was hungry or needed to be changed, and she seemed to love being held by any member of the family. Zachariah would walk her around the house at night when she fussed, singing her the old songs his mother had sung to him, and she would settle against his chest and fall asleep to the sound of his heartbeat. Greta recovered slowly from the birth, and Zachariah took over most of the household duties, learning to cook and clean and care for a newborn while also managing his work at the lumber operation. It was exhausting, but he did it gladly, grateful beyond measure that both Greta and the baby had survived. Winter arrived, and with it came the moment Zachariah had been dreading. The soldiers returned, this time with an officer who introduced himself as Captain Williams. He stood in the yard and demanded to see the half-breed child that he had heard about. "My daughter is not a spectacle for you to gawk at," Zachariah said, his voice cold. "Your daughter is an abomination," the captain said. "Half human, half orc. She should not exist." "She exists, and she is beautiful and perfect and mine. Now get off my land." "I have orders from the king himself. Any orc found within the kingdom's borders is to be arrested and returned to orc territory. That includes your wife. My wife has committed no crime. She has been living here peacefully for over a year. She is an orc. That is crime enough." The captain gestured to his men. "Seize her." What happened next unfolded very quickly. The soldiers moved toward the house, and Greta appeared in the doorway with Lily in her arms and a crossbow in her free hand. She raised the weapon, pointing it directly at the captain's chest. "I will not go with you," she said, her voice steady. "I have done nothing wrong. I have a husband and children who need me. If you try to take me, I will defend myself." "You are threatening an officer of the king," the captain said, but Zachariah could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "I am defending my family," Greta corrected. "There is a difference." Zachariah stepped between Greta and the soldiers, his heart pounding. "Leave now, and there will be no trouble. Try to take my wife, and there will be blood. I do not care if you are soldiers or not. No one takes my family from me." The captain looked at him, then at Greta with the baby in her arms and the crossbow pointed unwaveringly at his chest, and then at the windows where Owen and Simon were visible, holding makeshift weapons. He seemed to be calculating the cost of following his orders, and whatever conclusion he came to, it made him take a step back. "This is not over," he said. "I will report this to my superiors. You will answer for harboring an enemy of the kingdom." "Let them come," Zachariah said. "I am done being afraid of you people." The soldiers left, but Zachariah knew the captain was right. This was not over. They had bought themselves time, but eventually someone would come who was willing to use force to separate their family. They needed a more permanent solution. It was Margaret who provided it. She came to visit a few days after the confrontation with the soldiers, and she brought with her a man Zachariah had never met. He was tall and distinguished-looking, with silver hair and intelligent eyes, and he introduced himself as Lord Nathaniel Harrington. "I am a magistrate," he said, "and I have been following your situation with interest." "Why would a magistrate care about us?" Zachariah asked warily. "Because what is happening to you is wrong, and because I believe the law is being misapplied." Lord Harrington sat down at the kitchen table and accepted the tea that Greta nervously offered him. "Tell me, Mr. Fletcher, are you aware that there is no actual law forbidding marriage between humans and orcs?" "There is not. No. There are laws about harboring enemy combatants, yes, but your wife is not a combatant. She was cast out by her clan, which makes her stateless. And there are laws about registration of non-human residents, but those laws have never been properly enforced. What the soldiers are doing, threatening to arrest your wife, is based on prejudice and fear, not on any legitimate legal grounds." Zachariah felt hope stir in his chest for the first time in weeks. "So they cannot arrest her? Not legally, no. But that does not mean they will not try." "Fear makes people do terrible things." Lord Harrington looked at Greta, who was holding Lily protectively. "With your permission, I would like to take on your case. I will petition the king directly for recognition of your marriage and for legal protection for your family. It will not be easy, and there are no guarantees, but I believe I can make a strong argument." "Why would you do this for us?" Greta asked quietly. Lord Harrington smiled, and there was something sad in his expression. "Because 20 years ago I loved a woman from the elf kingdoms, and I was too afraid of what people would think to marry her. She went back to her people, and I never saw her again. I have regretted that cowardice every day since. I cannot undo my mistakes, but I can perhaps help you avoid making the same ones I did." They agreed to let him help, and over the following months, Lord Harrington worked tirelessly on their behalf. He traveled to the capital, presented their case to the King's Council, and argued passionately for the recognition of their marriage. It was a long and frustrating process, full of setbacks and delays, but Lord Harrington never gave up. During this time, life went on. Lily grew from a tiny newborn into a chubby, happy baby who laughed at everything and adored her big brothers. Owen and Simon doted on her, fighting over who got to hold her or play with her or feed her. Greta recovered her strength and went back to working at the lumber operation part-time, bringing Lily with her in a sling against her chest. Zachariah continued to manage the crews and extract what little copper he could from the mine in his spare time. They also began to notice a shift in how some of the people around them treated them. The men at the lumber operation had fully accepted Greta and were now fiercely protective of her and Lily. When word spread about the soldiers threatening to arrest her, several of the crew members offered to help defend the property if it came to that. Margaret made it clear that anyone who had a problem with Greta was not welcome in her employ, and that seemed to settle the matter for most people. There were still those who looked at them with hatred or fear, still whispers and pointed fingers when they went to town, but there were also others who looked at them with curiosity or even admiration. One woman stopped Greta in the market and told her that she thought what Greta and Zachariah were doing was brave. A farmer offered to sell them vegetables at a fair price when others had refused. Small kindnesses, but they mattered. Spring came again, marking a full year since their wedding, and with it came news from Lord Harrington. He arrived at the house looking tired but triumphant, and he gathered the whole family in the kitchen before making his announcement. "I have secured a ruling from the King's Council," he said. "Your marriage is now legally recognized, and Greta has been granted permanent residency status within the kingdom. She cannot be arrested or deported simply for being an orc. You are a legitimate family in the eyes of the law." Greta made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob, and Zachariah pulled her into his arms, holding her and Lily together. Owen and Simon cheered, and Lord Harrington smiled at them all with satisfaction. "There are conditions," he continued. "Greta will need to register with the local magistrate once a year and report any extended travel outside the valley. And if there are any more children, they will need to be registered as well. But you are safe now. No one can take your family from you." "Thank you," Zachariah said, his voice thick with emotion. "I do not know how we can ever repay you." "Live well," Lord Harrington said simply. "Love each other. Raise your children to be kind and brave. That is payment enough." After he left, Zachariah and Greta sat together on the porch, watching the boys play in the yard with Lily crawling between them on a blanket. The afternoon sun was warm, and the air smelled of growing things, and Zachariah felt a contentment so deep and complete that it almost frightened him. "I cannot believe we made it," Greta said quietly. "There were so many times I thought we would not survive, that the world would tear us apart, but we did it." "We did," Zachariah agreed, "and we will keep doing it. Every day we will choose each other and our family, and that will be enough." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, and they sat like that watching their children play until the sun began to set, and it was time to go inside for dinner. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were still people who disapproved of their marriage, still moments when they faced prejudice or hatred because of what they were. But they had each other, and they had their children, and they had built a community of people who accepted them and supported them. Margaret remained a close friend, and Lord Harrington visited regularly, always bringing gifts for the children and stories about his work in the capital. Owen and Simon grew into strong, capable young men who defended their mother and sister fiercely against anyone who dared speak ill of them. Lily grew into a bright, curious little girl who loved to explore the woods and help her mother in the garden, and follow her father around asking endless questions about how things worked. She had her mother's strength and her father's kind heart, and Zachariah often thought she was the perfect symbol of what he and Greta had built together. Greta thrived in her new life. She took over managing the accounts for the lumber operation, proving to have a sharp head for numbers and organization. She also began teaching other orc women who had been cast out by their clans, offering them shelter and work, and helping them build new lives in human territory. It was dangerous work, as not all humans were accepting and not all orcs wanted to integrate, but Greta was passionate about it, and Zachariah supported her completely. The mine eventually exhausted completely, and Zachariah sealed it up and converted the land into pasture for sheep. It was less profitable than copper had been, but it was steady work, and it gave him more time to spend with his family. He learned to shear sheep and spin wool, and Greta learned to weave, and together they built a small but successful textile business. On their 5th wedding anniversary, they held a proper celebration, inviting everyone who had supported them over the years. Margaret came, and Lord Harrington, and the men from the lumber crews with their families, and the few farmers and merchants who had treated them with kindness. They roasted a whole pig and laid out tables full of food, and there was music and dancing that went on until well past midnight. Zachariah danced with Greta under the stars, holding her close while Owen played his fiddle and Simon kept time on a drum. Lily was asleep in Margaret's arms, worn out from running around with the other children, and Zachariah felt a profound gratitude for everything they had built together. "What are you thinking about?" Greta asked, her amber eyes reflecting the torchlight. "About that night I found you in the watchtower," he said. "About how close I came to walking past without stopping, about how different my life would be if I had made that choice. And you are glad you stopped. I am glad I stopped. I am glad you came with me. I am glad for every single moment since then, even the hard ones, even the scary ones, because they all led us here to this." He gestured at the celebration around them, at their children, at their friends. "To this life we have built together." She kissed him then, long and sweet, and when they broke apart she said, "I love you, Zachariah Fletcher. Thank you for giving me a roof and a home and a family and everything I never knew I needed. I love you too, Greta Fletcher. Thank you for accepting when a desperate miner told you he needed order for his sons. Thank you for staying. Thank you for building this life with me." They danced until the music stopped, and then they stood together under the stars, holding each other and watching their children sleep, and knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. They had fought for their right to love each other, had stood against prejudice and fear and the weight of two worlds that said they should not exist, and they had won. Not because the world had changed overnight, not because everyone had suddenly accepted them, but because they had refused to give up on each other. They had built a family out of desperation and need, and they had transformed it into something full of love and joy and hope. Years later, when Lily was grown and had children of her own, she would ask her parents how they had done it, how they had made such an impossible thing work. And Zachariah would look at Greta, and Greta would look back at him, and they would smile in the way that only people who have lived through something extraordinary together can smile. "We decided we needed each other more than we needed the approval of the world," Greta would say. "And we were right," Zachariah would add. And Lily would nod, understanding in a way that only their daughter could, because she was living proof that love could bridge any divide. That family was not about blood or species, but about the choices people made to stand by each other, no matter what. The miner and the orc woman had taken a desperate gamble on each other, and it had become the foundation of something beautiful and lasting and true. They had given each other what they needed most, a roof over one's head and order for the other's children. And in the process, they had discovered that they needed each other in ways neither of them had anticipated. They had found love in the most unlikely place, and they had fought to keep it, and in the end, that had made all the difference. On a warm summer evening many years after that first meeting in the watchtower, Zachariah and Greta sat on their porch watching the sunset. They were older now, their hair touched with gray, their faces lined with the years they had lived together. Owen was married with children of his own, working as a carpenter in the next town over. Simon had followed in his father's footsteps and now managed the textile business. Lily had married a young man from the borderlands, someone who understood what it meant to be caught between two worlds, and they were expecting their first child. "Do you ever regret it?" Zachariah asked, not for the first time. "Leaving your clan, accepting my offer, building this life with me?" "Never," Greta said firmly, also not for the first time. "My clan gave me strength and taught me to fight, but you gave me a reason to live. You gave me a home and a family and a love I never thought possible. Why would I regret that? Sometimes I worry that I took you from your people, that you gave up too much for me. You did not take me from anything. I was already lost when you found me. You gave me a new path, a new purpose. And my people, my real people, are here. You and our children and our grandchildren and everyone we have brought together. This is my clan now, the family I chose, and it is so much better than the one I was born into." He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers the way he had done 1,000 times before. I was so scared that night. Scared of what people would think, scared of what might happen, scared that I was making a terrible mistake. But I looked at you and I saw someone who needed help, and I could not walk away. I was terrified too, she admitted. I thought you might be leading me into a trap. I thought you might hurt me or turn me over to the authorities. But I had nowhere else to go, and something in your eyes told me I could trust you. I am so glad I listened to that instinct. They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple. Lightning bugs began to emerge from the grass, blinking in the gathering darkness, and somewhere in the distance an owl called out to the night. "Tell me something," Greta said eventually. "If you could go back to that moment, to that night when you found me in the watchtower, would you do anything differently?" Zachariah thought about it, really thought about it. He thought about all the hardships they had faced, the threats and the prejudice and the fear. He thought about the nights he had lain awake worried that someone would take her away or hurt their children. He thought about the sacrifices they had both made, the difficulties of building a life together when the whole world seemed determined to tear them apart. Then he thought about their wedding day, about the first time he had held Lily in his arms, about the laughter of his sons and the warmth of Greta beside him every night. He thought about the community they had built, the people they had helped, the love they had shared. "No," he said finally. "I would not change a single thing. Because every choice we made, every hardship we faced, it brought us here. And here is exactly where I want to be." Greta smiled, and in the fading light her tusks caught the last rays of sun, and Zachariah thought she had never looked more beautiful. "Then we have lived well," she said simply. "We have," he agreed. And as the stars began to emerge one by one in the darkening sky, the miner and the orc woman sat together on their porch, their hands clasped, their hearts full, surrounded by the life they had built from nothing but desperation and hope, and the willingness to take a chance on each other. They had made it through all the storms and challenges, had proven that love could exist even where the world said it should not, and they had created something that would outlast them both. Their children and grandchildren would carry forward the legacy of their courage, would remember the story of how a desperate miner had offered shelter to an outcast orc woman, and how together they had built a family that defied every expectation. It was not a story that would be written in history books or sung by bards. It was a small story, a personal story, the kind that happened every day when people chose to see beyond their differences and reach out to each other with compassion and hope. But it was their story, and it was real, and it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.